Well, first of all, sadly, Susan isn't here. She left earlier because of the sequelae of her earlier surgery. However, and so therefore I am, Frances and I are tasked with filling her shoes, which is always a big task. And so the first part of what we were charged with doing was summarizing what we've done today, which is really sort of amazing to do. So let me suggest some of this. First of all, with regard to the discussion of informed consent, what I think we have heard today is a really diverse set of views about what this is, what its points are, how well we're achieving it or not. We've heard Alex in particular talk about the origins going back now a century and coming up to the current day, and really talking about its roots in the idea of giving people choice about making decisions about whether they participate in research and whether they have some choices about their clinical care. And we've also heard about some of the ongoing discussions about how complicated that is. Mark just actually talked about that a few minutes ago when he talked about the idea of this ongoing, this conversation between the physician or the researcher and the patient. And one of the things that I would just point out here is that very frequently it's not the PI or the lead physician who is doing the consent conversation. It's often somebody else who may not have the same kind of sense of communication or connection that comes from that kind of conversation. So in some ways, this conversation has really been pretty sobering to talk about how really complicated some of this is. We also talked some about what we do about deciding for others, or people whose capacity for decision making is either constrained or limited in some way or other. We talked about this. Rick Kodich talked about this in the context of children and adolescents, and acknowledging that this is an absolute trade-off. If we don't study kids, we just abandon them. I mean, and if you don't think that's a trade-off, that is. And so, trying to think about how we do this, and I really honor his call for a greater understanding of what assent ought to mean, because it's actually a fairly thin concept in many settings. And we also heard some talk about some considerable conversation about the notions about dealing with people who have mental illness or some other kinds of impairments, and how we address this, about how, and it raises some of the same kinds of issues about, how you address duress, how you address situations that feel coercive, and a variety of other decisions of that nature. And the story that we learn from that is that there's still work to be done. I mean, this is not new news, but boy, we've heard this affirmed. We've also heard in this regard some hopeful notions as we talk about perhaps other ways of conveying information, at least so that there's some kind of opportunity for conversation about values in ways that are more innovative than what we've seen in the past. And so, so that strikes me as issues that hold out promise in the future. Another issue that came out today, I think very forcefully in the context of informed consent, is that it is really important, but it is not all there is. That we have to think about governance in a way that is really important. Thinking about the responsibility of the research enterprise and thinking about how we ensure that these conversations occur, how we prevent harms, how we think about notions of group harms, which is a fairly vexed topic. All of this needs to go on at the same time as we have the notions of informed consent about, about the researcher participant or the patient. The final thing that I want to say about this, in this regard, is that we've also had some conversation here about data and biospecimens and the issue about identifiability or not. And I was asked specifically to talk about whether there are special challenges about genomics. And I will assert that although we have come to feel that genetics is special, and that has been shaped, importantly, by much in our environment, that one of the things that is striking to me, and here I'm thinking about Effie and her big chart that she had up there, the fact of the matter is there is so much other information about us that is so much riskier than genomic sequence information that, that we really need to think about all of this information and how it works both in combinatorials and independently, and to sort of make some decisions about, is there some kind of research for which informed consent may not be necessary, but for which governance is always critical, or are we going to take the position that any sort of research has to be done with consent? I think that is an open question. We certainly saw this debate just go forward in the ANPRM and the NPRM, and ultimately the reason that that the identifiability rule was not adopted in the final rule, or quasi-final, I should say that. At least according to what Jerry Menikoff put in the New England Journal of Medicine, was not because people like me or people like many other people in this room thought that that particular requirement was misguided, but because patients wrote in and said, we don't want this. If you make us consent to every single use of biospecimens, we will never learn what's going on with the disease that affects me or my family, and we don't want this. And that's why that's at least why, that's what he reports they used in making their decision making. So I think we have ongoing challenges, and I think we heard about many of them. It's really difficult to talk about human conversation. That's not new in research, and it's not new in patient-physician or patient-clinician conversations. Our life is testament to difficulties of conversation, and we're not going to solve that anytime soon, but we can do better rather than worse. We can think about better, more effective mechanisms of governance, but recognizing that although I think those are absolutely essential, in most cases, in many, many cases in research and in patient care, they will not suffice to replace this conversation, and appropriately so. So there is a balance there. We need to figure out where it is. And then I think we need to think about what we're doing in a better way with data and specimens. But we need to get over this genomic data part and say we need to look at all the data that we're talking about putting together. Because frankly, what was the example that you gave, Effie, about using genomic data and health data, and then what was the third thing that you were looking?
Credit history.
Credit history. I mean, that actually sort of freaks me out more. In fact, it freaks me out a lot more than my genome. So just saying. So I think we have a lot of work going forward. I think I, too, am optimistic. I remain to think that, it's possible to do better than to do worse. And so I am hopeful in that regard. But boy, do we have a lot of work to do. Now, Frances, I'm going to turn it to you.
Yeah, well, I have no summaries. Ellen was the summary person. I just have housekeeping. So, yeah, good call for Ellen. So I wanted to just remind you that this has been videotaped and it'll be posted to the consortium website. There's going to be a special issue of the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics from some of the people that were up here. They're going to write articles for that. I'm reminding you to fill out your evaluation form that you're going to get tomorrow. It'll also, those of you that are taking this for continuing education, your continuing education form is in there. And I wanted to remind you that tomorrow is the first annual University of Minnesota Research Ethics Day, and there's going to be another lovely set of speakers and the topic for that day, it'll just be from 8:30 till 1, and it's the challenges of informed consent, research with children, adolescents, and adults, and it will run, like I said, from 8:30 to 1, and then there is a box lunch that's included with that. So if you guys have time tomorrow to come to continue this great conversation, that would be good. And after that, there will be workshops in the afternoon related to informed consent. And then let's just clap for everybody, and thanks for a great success.